Hello, this is Dr. Galliano, and I'm your instructor in the course SEC 4302. And of course, this is about the halfway point of planning and audits for Term 5A22. This is our second live session of the course, and we will cover the first 4 units. And we'll do it in about 40 minutes. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. In this course, Unit 1, we focused on Introduction to Information Systems Security Compliance. And in Unit 1, we looked at Chapter 1. Now, that comprises part 1 of the textbook, which is kind of broken down as the need for compliance. All right, and so in this particular area, when we talk about the need for compliance, we're really kind of concentrating on establishing why we conduct compliance activities. And one of the things we want to look at is why audits and assessments have increased over time. And there are some drivers there. For example, the ubiquitous nature of the internet over the past 15 to 20 years. If you think about it, it can be somewhat difficult to conduct our daily lives without some kind of access to the internet. And with the rise of mobile, web 2.0 and the cloud, the integration of these various technologies has become both a way to drive more efficient business processes, but also it's made us more reliant on having that connection to the internet. And when those things go down, then all of a sudden we can't do what we need to do to carry on our daily lives. I like to tell the story of when I was living in Honolulu. This was back in 2007. And we had a mild earthquake. It was only like a 5.1, maybe a 5.2. They initially thought it was a little bit stronger. But in the big scheme of things, that's not a large earthquake. That's not a devastating earthquake, right? And that occurred at I remember it very fondly because it was a Sunday morning, and I was kind of in that in and out land where you're half awake and yet you're not fully cognizant, and you're kind of drifting in and out a little bit. And I remember having a thought to myself that I should just go ahead and get up because it was getting close to 7, and that meant that Hawaii time, that the NFL games and pregame shows would be starting soon. And just about as soon as I had that thought, I felt the shaking. And, I'd been in earthquakes before in other places like Alaska. And, in comparison, this was a small earthquake, right? I mean, it lasted what seemed like forever, which was probably, less than a minute, really. And then it was over. And I was thinking, okay, well, that was interesting. Definitely felt that one. But what was more interesting about that is the fact that not long after that, the power went out. Maybe not even 10 minutes after that. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And then I thought, okay, well, let me start making some phone calls, probably like everybody else on the island of Oahu. And by about 7:31 or so that morning, the circuits were saturated, and there was no making a cell phone call. And so then I thought to myself, okay, well, no football this morning. Maybe I'll focus on doing some things around the house and maybe a little yard work. And before you know it, power will be back on and we'll be back to business as normal. And hour went by, a couple of hours went by, uh, you know, getting to be towards lunchtime, and there's still no power and still no cell phone service. And so I thought, well, uh, I'll go out to the garage. And I got in the car and I turned on the radio, and there wasn't a single radio station to be found on the FM dial. I thought, well, that's kind of spooky. Let me try AM. And, you know, by coincidence, I started at the high end. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And finally, I got down to, I think it was 570, kind of a common broadcast channel on the AM band. And I finally found a loud and clear radio station. So there was actually one station that was broadcasting, an AM station that, was properly backed up with emergency power generators and all that. And so, several hours in, I was able to get some updates. And, it wasn't anything major. They were talking about, some damages, smaller damages that had occurred on the Big Island. And there was some, worry about a tsunami. There was a watch, which means possible. And they weren't expecting it to be a significant tsunami, if there was any impact at all. And basically, we're telling people to sit tight, and that crews were working to restore power. And so, I gave it what seemed like a few more hours, so now we're getting, maybe past 1 o'clock, 1:30. And I thought, well, let me just take a spin down the neighborhood here and, see if I can get something to eat or see what's going on. And by that time, they'd already kind of closed up the supermarkets. You couldn't get gas. There's no electricity to be pumped. There's no internet. And really, the only services that were being offered were the restaurants that were basically cooking out of the kitchen because they still had gas. And so, I was able to pick me up some Thai food and take that back to the house and enjoy it. And so, that is a really important lesson there. Now, as it turned out, we did get power restored, and it was at like after 8 o'clock that evening, I believe. And I guess by luck of the draw, our particular area was one of the later areas to get power restored. But it turns out what happened was, at that point in time, I don't know if it's changed any or not, but something like 94%, if memory serves me correctly, of the power generated on Oahu in that time frame was generated by diesel generators, right? So there's no real hydroelectric in Hawaii. At that time, wind power really hadn't amounted to anything very significant. It was before the point in time where solar systems were cheap enough and efficient enough to be widely deployed on homes, although some people had them, and so lacking any other sources of power, everything was generated by diesel fuel, and the major power plant, they had more than one, but the one single power plant was kind of state of the art and did the bulk of the generation. And it turns out that what happened was an operator or operators became spooked at the outset of the earthquake, and actually overrode the automated controls and took the turbine down, or turbines down. And if you know anything about electrical power generation, those turbines are highly engineered, highly precision machines. And it turns out that when you shut one down, you just can't flip the switch and spin it back up. You have to follow a very lengthy and step-by-step protocol in order to spin those things back up to high RPM and get them functioning again. And so once it was down for a long time. And as they struggled to restore services, that's why we were without power for so long. And that was a result of, perhaps a misjudgment. I think the verdict's kind of out on that a little bit, but certainly the impact is not. And so that's one reason, but there's also the collapse of the companies that we saw in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, prior to the financial collapse of 2008, those being the Enrons and the WorldComs, were basically, because of lack of oversight and controls, those companies weren't really in charge of their finances in the way that they were portrayed to be. And so they were showing false value on the market and so on. So it's important then that we understand that there are differences between audits and assessments. Sometimes those differences can be great, right? And there may also be differences between internal and external auditors, even though they may have some of the same functions. But there are very different roles and there are differences in their roles and the expectations. But regardless of all that, there are key components that we need to be concerned about when it comes to ensuring successful risk management and strategies to employ when it comes to compliance. One of those is adequate governance. And going hand in hand with that is oversight of those activities, right? And when we have proper oversight and proper governance, those are the kinds of things that help us prevent other companies from, taking the path of the Enrons and the WorldComs. And so that was kind of what we covered in chapter 1. And that comprised most of unit 1. Now, in unit 1, you also had a deliverable. And unit 1, you took a look at the Enron fraud case. You looked at the compliance requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and you performed a lab in which you were able to, investigate to a greater depth how SOX could be applied to a case such as Enron. All right, so then that took us to Unit 2. And in Unit 2, we covered compliance laws and IT compliance audits. And excuse me, in Unit 2, the first thing we did was we took kind of a survey or an overview of various U.S. compliance laws. And some of the things that we looked at there were the laws or the statutes, in addition to things like industry standards such as the PCI DSS, which is a perfect example of a non-statute kind of a regulation where industry has come together and police themselves with a hope that they wouldn't be subject to government regulation, which can be seen as onerous and many times not to your liking. So that's a really well-known example of that. Some of the laws only affect certain industries, right? or certain verticals, while others cut across all industries. So again, if we take the example of PCI DSS, that's kind of a cross-cutting regulation, provided that the organization, in some way holds, processes, passes payment cardholder information. So it really is industry agnostic in that sense. But then if you compare that to something like the Health Information Portability Accountability Act, HIPAA, that's primarily centered on the healthcare industry. Sarbanes-Oxley is primarily centered on publicly traded companies. And so this kind of patchwork, if you will, of different laws and regulations can be both targeted or they can be broad in scope. Now, although compliance with these various regulations and statutes will often impact many parts of an organization, kind of getting back to the ubiquitous nature of the internet and information technology, what we're increasingly finding is that traditional IT departments have to stay abreast of these various regulations and statutes just because of the pervasive nature of IT. It's almost impossible in organizations these days to find any unit or division that in some way has not incorporated IT into all of their processes and workflows, right? And so IT has become like a glue then that kind of holds all of these things together. And so that's why we need to be up on what all of these things are, because we're often called to participate in audits and provide artifacts, and we're the enabler for many of these workflows and processes. So yeah, it may seem overwhelming, but the way you overcome that is you do everything in your power to establish sound governance. You have strong risk management, and you participate in a compliance program that employs a well-defined framework. And when you do those things, when you lay that groundwork, you'll find that the process of compliance and auditing and assessments is efficient and many times very effective. So then we kind of started talking about how you scope an IT compliance audit. And one way we can do that that makes a lot of sense is to align our scope along with the 7 classical IT domains. Now, before we get there, I just want to mention that audits often are required by law, but the smart organizations and the smart IT departments actually want to conduct more regular assessments. If nothing else, you can view an assessment as practice for an audit, right? And that's a very real thing. So regular assessments help you ensure that the audits are going to be more successful, and that you use those assessments as a dry run to make certain that you can help the auditors accomplish their mission, and where to find the things that they're going to ask for, and that you're ready when they show up on your doorstep. But more than that, the more regularly you assess things, the better you're going to be able to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information systems, and protect your privacy data. And so with that in mind, the next thing that we need to do is make sure that we begin our assessments and audits based upon some kind of a framework, right? If you can do that, then you have a structure to your assessments and audits. Now, there's a ton of different frameworks that can be used to implement both risk management and policy programs, as well as different frameworks that can be used for conducting audits and assessments. But suffice it to say that understanding and managing the scope of a compliance audit really is critical to your success and having an efficient audit outcome. And then we will take a look at how we can best achieve a compliance by employing the 7 domains of IT infrastructure. So that, I think, is what we covered in Unit 2. So moving to Unit 3, auditing standards and planning for an IT infrastructure audit. There we utilized chapters 4 and 5 of the textbook, where we looked at auditing standards and frameworks, and then planning a compliance audit. So let's go ahead and move over to those. Now, in Unit 3, your deliverable in Unit 3, to go along with that theme, you were tasked to look at basically information, conducting research about the healthcare industry, right? So it was really intended to be a deep dive into HIPAA. And you did that based upon applying NIST standards and understanding how best to protect electronic protected health information. And so that one was, it had several, I think a total of 6 or 7 lab components. So it is kind of a lengthy one, and there's a lot there, but it is worthwhile because you kind of get to step through exactly how you might evaluate HIPAA in the real world if you were to conduct an audit of HIPAA in your organization. All right, so let's see, continuing on from there then with Unit 3, we want to go ahead and take a look at what we cover in chapters 4 and 5. Now, that took us into part 2 of the textbook, which the authors titled Auditing for Compliance, Frameworks, Tools, and Techniques. And in chapter 4, we were concentrating on the standards and frameworks. And what you learned about was that there are many standards and many frameworks. They all have a goal, a common goal of establishing, I guess we could call it sensible practices in the organization. And one of the things that you need to kind of think about are the advantages and disadvantages of these various standards and frameworks. For example, COSO, right? COSO. That's generally a framework that has been found to be appealing to senior level executives because that's kind of how it was designed. There is the ISO 27000 series, specifically 27002, and that's a very kind of a prescriptive framework. And those controls are noted to be prescriptive. And that, frankly, does appeal to security people, right? And technology people, because those controls and their prescriptive nature, are just very, very easy to apply when you're trying to fix security issues. But having said that, a combination of these various standards and frameworks quite often allows you to tailor what you need for your unique organization. Now, you might be asking, well, what is the point of using a framework? And what I usually say to that question is there are several benefits, actually. Um, Probably one of the most important ones when the auditors are breathing down your neck is that you both can speak the same language, right? So there's a common point of reference. You both can refer to the same framework. All of the portions of that framework are well known. And so therefore, what you're going to be audited on is well known. So it makes things transparent. But it also makes conducting the audit very efficient because you're not trying to determine during the audit how you're going to evaluate something or even why you're going to evaluate something. You use the framework. The framework says that you should implement two-factor or multi-factor authentication in your network for accessing network resources. That's very clear, isn't it? And so, if that's the control that is recommended, then, it becomes a matter of how well you comply with that control, not whether you should have the control or not. And so it brings efficiency. And of course, anytime you have efficient processes, you can conduct an audit, in a minimum amount of time. And so the less time you have people on your site, conducting the audit, that's the better, but it also saves money, right? And then there's also the aspect of when you go to report results, you will report audit results aligned to the framework. And so again, there's that common reference point that can be easily understood and tied back to whatever, compliance regulations and statutes that you are subject to. And then I guess the last thing would be that when you're using a common framework like that, it's very easy to integrate audit results across organizations or across parts of the same organization. But you also can compare apples with apples across your industry, right? So now you can begin understanding how you measure up from a security posture standpoint with other organizations within your field or your industry, right? So very helpful for that as well. Now, when it comes to planning audits, there's several things that go into planning an audit for compliance. And some of the things that need to be considered is, first of all, that you should plan the work and then work the plan. And although that sounds simple, many times people fail to prepare for an audit. They fail to plan for an audit, and then they wonder why they got findings that weren't so nice, right? Or why they failed an audit. So, developing an audit plan is extremely important. Now, going along with that, you need to identify and prioritize risks. That's a key component of your audit plan. So how do you get there? Well, identifying and prioritizing risks will give you the information you need to make informed decisions about the scope and objectives of an audit, as well as any resources that are required. So, without that understanding of what your risks are and how they're prioritized, then it's just really difficult to narrow down the scope of an audit. And if you do have those things, then you have something to kind of stand on. You also will know, what kind of resources you need to lay against that audit plan. So if you're going to be audited on your compliance with PCI DSS, for example, you know what that framework is comprised of. You know ahead of time what all of the controls are. You hopefully have conducted an assessment to see how well you comply with those controls. So at that point, you have a really good understanding of what it's going to take to get well. And so you now can ask for the resources to help you get there, right? In terms of money and manpower and, other assistance that you may need. Now, with that in mind, one of the things that you need to do is align the scope with the objectives. And you gather all pertinent information before the audit. And that makes the process of testing your security controls, much more straightforward. And you want to make that process as straightforward as you can. You definitely want to make life easier on the auditor. So, my recommendation to you is test your controls, have your artifacts in place to demonstrate how you tested the controls, or your procedures, I should say, and have the artifacts to back up how you rated your assessment of the control. If you have those things or those ducks all in a row, that makes the auditor's job very, very easy. And you can probably say that it behooves you to try to do that, right? So, so the auditor's ability to conduct the audit will be streamlined, but even more importantly, their ability to report on the results will be a direct reflection of the success of your audit plan. All right. So that gets us through Unit 3. Unit 4, we transition to conducting an audit and writing the audit report. So in Unit 4, your deliverable was taking a look at the vulnerability lifecycle, and also understanding the different types of disclosure that can be used to mitigate different risk factors. Part of that deliverable is also identifying risks that, attacks, vulnerabilities, malicious code, phishing, underground economies, spam, all those kinds of things, right? All those kinds of threats and vulnerabilities have on organizations, right? Okay, so then moving over to chapter, let's see, where were we at on that? Chapter 6 then. So chapter 6 is where we looked at, let's see here, why is that? Might be because I accidentally minimized the window. Need to get that application back up here. Not that one. Is it this one? Nope. Pardon me while I find the right window here. Let's go there. There we go. All right. So we've got the right application up again. And then now we want to move on to chapter 6. So that was conducting an infrastructure audit. So in chapter 6 then, some of the things that we looked at in chapter 6 included, again, first having that adequate plan that we talked about. And part of that adequate plan means establishing baselines. Now, baselines are snapshots, right? So it's like taking a picture of yourself or of a family member on January 1st, 2022. That is a baseline. And then later on in June 1st, 2022, you take another picture and you compare the two. And you say, oh, wow, a few things have changed. Different hairstyle, maybe different clothing. Maybe your relative lost a few pounds. But that's a kind of an easy way of understanding what a baseline is. So you establish those baselines, and then you identify for your organization what an acceptable level of risk is. And those things provide the starting point for an audit. From there, you follow usually some kind of a common methodology while allowing for enough flexibility, based upon, on the ground, what occurs actually during the audit. So there's also the idea of, pre and during and post audit. I'll kind of explain it in those terms. So quite often, and this is very common, you'll have a discovery phase of an audit. So that's before the audit. And you'll be asked to provide documentation, answer questions, provide the scope of your network, IP ranges, all kinds of things like that, right? As the auditors prepare for conducting the audit. And those also become valuable as you move into the actual audit phase, where you continue to gather and use available resources and answer the auditor's questions and provide them what they need. And that's going to include continued interaction with the organization. They'll likely conduct, face-to-face interviews with various, elements of the organization, senior leadership, managers, users, IT people, and so forth. They're quite likely, in fact, I would be shocked if you had an audit that didn't use computerized auditing tools. And that embraces several different things, right? So they quite likely will use, digitized programs for documenting the audit, right? And that can range from everything from, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, databases. Maybe they have a custom application just for conducting audits. Quite often, the big third-party auditors will have that, the Deloitte and Touche and, others that are called in as third parties. So you'll see a gamut of various auditing tools, both for tracking progress of the audit, holding artifacts, formulating the reports, and that process starts before, continues through, and continue during, and then continues after the actual audit. And they will review, available configuration items, audit logs, all those things. But at the end of it, they produce some kind of a final report. Now, quite often in my experience, when an auditor comes in, usually within a short time frame, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, something like that, they'll provide some kind of preliminary report and reserve the right, for minor changes and such before they really say final report. Sometimes months later, right? It could even stretch out to as long as 4 to 6 months. And they'll usually do some kind of an out brief where they physically present the report findings to executive leadership, quite often the CEO of the organization. And all of the executive management and managers will be present. And I've seen those things be quite tense because often the outcome of an audit can be less than desirable. And that moves us into chapter 7, and that's writing the report. So when we're talking about the audit report, there's a lot of things that go into it, actually. And so, once the audit team kind of decides that, the audit is complete, we completed all of our checklists, we've checked all the boxes that we were supposed to check according to the scope of this audit. they'll kind of immediately transition into finalizing whatever findings that they came up with and getting those into report format. And remember, they're kind of doing two deliverables simultaneously, right? They're coming up with a preliminary report that is written, a written report in some kind of electronic document, but they're also probably building a slide deck so that they can brief executive management, right? So very related, the two things, but also distinct, right? And so, they'll be constantly referring back and forth between the two products to make sure that what they're communicating during the briefing to executive management is the same message that comes out in the final report. So those reports can take many different forms, right? There is no standard audit report. That's really going to be driven more by your organization, more by the policies that your organization has, or the third party that you call to provide the audit. And that's not so important as is the communication of the results. And that's the really dicey part of conducting an audit. And let me tell you, I've been in some pretty tense situations because the findings that we had to present were less than flattering to the organization being audited. And that very often gets the attention of senior leadership. And it could be that, they had no clue of the true nature or extent of non-compliance. And so not only are they not happy about the findings, they may be angry that they weren't more involved. And so it can be pretty challenging communicating those results. But it is vital that you do everything in your power to prevent misunderstandings. So make sure you're presenting the facts. Keep as much of your own opinion and perceptions out of it as you can. Definitely don't let emotion enter into the communication of the findings, but do it in a professional manner and communicate how the findings relate to the business and why the compliant or the non-compliant situation exists. And remember, you're always going to go back to your framework, right? So that law or statute that derived, that audit checklist, and so everything has a very concrete linkage. And if you have that, then you're going to find communication of unpleasant news is going to be much easier to do. And then finally, I guess I would add that communicating those results during that out brief and in that preliminary report are also very important in ensuring adequate follow-up actions occur. In many situations, the organization will be required to make regular reports of their own to show how they have fixed things that were revealed in the audit. And that could be to corporate, higher headquarters, could be to government agencies, right? And so the communication of your results will help foster an accurate and adequate follow-up on those things. And so that's all I have for you. That is the first 4 units of the course. And I look forward to how we progress in the remainder of the course over the next 4 units. Keep in mind that as you work on your deliverables, that you want those to be portfolio ready so that you can take those and use them as evidence of your experience gained while at Columbia State, or rather Columbia Southern University. And your employers will want to see those kinds of things, right? In today's job market, it's really important to demonstrate what you can do, whether that be skills or building policies or conducting audits. Employers want to see the impact of what you say you can do. And there's no better way to do that than providing job ready portfolios. And these assignments are designed to allow you to do that. So with that, I'll let you go, and I will see you in Blackboard. Have a great rest of your evening.